Hi everyone, this is Brenna Kantner from Nexus Youth and Family Services, bringing you our May Wellness Workshop, and today we will be discussing some strategies in adapting after trauma and stress. So trauma of any kind can be hard on your mental health. It can be really overwhelming to your daily functioning. So implementing coping skills and some strategies can help you feel more resilient and more at ease. So we all face trauma and adversity and other stresses throughout our life. But when we talk about trauma, we have big T trauma, which is things like abuse, terrorism, like big events, community traumas, suicides, things like that. Those are big T traumas. And then there's also those little T traumas, which are things like frequent arguing, domestic violence, loss of a job, things like that. So it's important to kind of know the difference between those two, but also recognize that we all face trauma and all have the ability to implement strategies to increase our resiliency in managing that trauma and stress as well. So the first step to processing trauma and stress and adapting to it, because when we experience trauma, our lens change and the way that we look at the world around us and our relationships, like it all changes or shifts at least. So during and after experiencing trauma, our brains tend to like shut down and go into survival mode. And sometimes, especially with like a big T trauma, it's hard to like have the energy to really wrap your head around what happened. And so sometimes we just push it down and avoid the feelings. We don't want to talk about it. We just want to move on, just ignore it. But processing your thoughts and talking about what happened and acknowledging what happened and how it impacted you is a super, super important part of healing. So I get the need for some survival initially after the shock and whatever the trauma is, but it's also really important as a part of moving forward and truly healing from it, is taking the time to think about it and talk about it, and like be really proud of yourself for pushing through it. Connecting with others is super, super, super important in adapting to stress and trauma. A lot of times trauma makes us feel really isolated and makes us kind of withdraw from others. But again, part of healing is having a support system. It's a crucial part of emotional well-being and healing from trauma that helps us not feel alone or is overwhelmed by what's going on. So connecting with people, whether it's your close friends, but it also can be really, really helpful to connect with people that have experienced something similar, been through a similar experience, or, has some close connection to a similar experience, because then it also, that feels validating to the stress and frustrations that you're having, and ultimately can help you get over any challenges that you're having and increase your resiliency. This one is so, 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 so important, and something that as a therapist I talk about all of the time. Your story is unique and different from other people's, and it's so important not to compare your experiences. And the way that comes in is we tend to question our thoughts or experiences, and push off what we're feeling and say we shouldn't be feeling a certain way because it could have been worse, or because somebody that blah, 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 blah happened to. And just that kind of concept of others have it worse, or like it could have been worse, and dismissing what you're feeling. But I've said it before and I'll say it again, your feelings are valid simply because you're feeling them. And no one's trauma, like stress is subjective. And so something that happens to me, like the same thing could happen to me, the same thing could happen to you right next to each other, same exact experience, same time. And the way it impacts us is different. So it's important to kind of keep in mind that just everyone experiences trauma differently. And if it hurt you, then it hurt you. And your experiences, your feelings, how it's impacting you, that's all valid. So no surprise that stress and trauma obviously don't only impact your mental health, but they impact your body and your physical health just as big. So listening to your body, giving what it needs, getting, healthy meals, getting enough sleep, staying hydrated, moving your body, exercising, those kind of back to basics things, eat, sleep, exercise are really helpful in healing trauma as well. And it has to fit into your life. So even if it's 5 minutes of stretching, right? Like moving your body, doing something is super important. And depending on the trauma and how it's impacting you, it might be easier to move or harder to move, right? As far as your motivation goes. And so it's important if you're feeling down and some like depression kind of symptoms because of the trauma, it might feel really overwhelming to get up and go for a run or go to the gym. But meditating and stretching, right? Like do what works for your body, listen to your body, but recognize the impact on your body and on your mind. Right? That saying, time heals all. So know that it will take time. There's no timeline on how you should heal or how long it should take you to feel better or normal. It's not linear. There's days where you're going to feel better and days where you're going to feel worse. And just because you have a bad day, it doesn't mean it's this like horrible setback or that you're failing or jumping back to the should have, would have kind of things. And being dismissive of your feelings. Like just know it'll take time. It takes time to heal. So take the pressure off of yourself of having to bounce back quickly and just focus on taking one step at a time. Focusing on what you need to do today, tomorrow, this week versus next month, in the next 6 months, the next year, right? Focus on today. It's also so important to give yourself grace. Dealing with trauma and stress is not easy. It's a process, right? It's not something that happens and then you get over it. Sometimes it can be slow, but just try to catch yourself in having those like unreasonable, in my opinion, unreasonable standards. Instead of saying, why am I acting like this? Or why don't I feel better? Be kind to yourself and have some self-compassion around it's pretty impressive that you keep going despite what's happened, that you go to work, go to school, whatever it is. Being kind to yourself, talking to yourself the way that you would talk to a friend, right? Like you would never tell your friend to just like get over it and like that it wasn't that big of a deal, right? But we do that to ourselves. So it's important to practice self-compassion and give yourself grace. Don't be ashamed to ask for help. There is a time and place for it. And there are people that can help, whether it is talking to a friend, talking to a family member, talking to someone at church, talking to a therapist, right? Like depending on what it is that you need. If you feel like you need help, it's important to ask for it because there are people that can help. Okay, so I have a few fast facts around trauma. So Mental Health America released this really amazing toolkit that has worksheets and things like that. And I'm going to share one of the worksheets for specific to adapting after trauma and stress. But they also have a ton of other resources. So this fast fact, though, they had people do a screening. So of the people who took a screen at the Mental Health America screening.org last year in 2020, past trauma was the second most reported cause for mental distress among screeners after loneliness. So loneliness was the first. The next fact is people who have been through trauma are 3 times more likely to experience depression. And the last fact I have for you today is of people who took a screen at mhascreening.org in 2020, who scored with moderate to severe symptoms of mental health. Over half of those people reported trauma as one of the main 3 contributors to their mental health issues. So I really like sharing resources, kind of going back to that ask for help. These are places that you can look for to get some support, in addition to talking to a friend or reaching out to a professional for therapy. So there's a couple podcasts here listed. Past trauma affects my relationships. So that's one just about how different traumas affect what's happening now, like years later, sometimes at the same time, but trauma affects all aspects of our life, including relationships. And so that's a really good podcast. And then the next one's I'm Exhausted from Explaining My Trauma. There's an article through Mental Health America that talks about, is all trauma the same? Because no, it is not, but trauma is trauma, and how it affects you is how it affects you. So it's a really interesting article. And then there's also here a couple webinars. So for those of you who don't know, May is Mental Health Month. So there are lots of tools, like I had mentioned, through Mental Health America. They have tons of resources, including a free, private, and anonymous screening. So that website is listed here at mhascreening.org. And then their actual website is here at mhanational.org. They have great resources, articles, and all kinds of different things on like every different kind of mental health topic. It's a pretty amazing website. They have webinars a couple times a week on different topics. Pretty awesome organization. Here is a worksheet that comes in 3 parts, but it talks about after a traumatic experience, it's helpful to get your thoughts out of your head. And so writing down experiences can help you gain perspective about your situation and kind of help reduce distressing thoughts, or at least identify where the distress is coming from. And we also, talked about how traumatic experiences shape and change and shift perspectives and the way you see yourself and others and the world around you. So there's another section for that. And then lastly, trauma and feelings and like emotions, all of that stuff, that's in our body. Like we feel that. So like if you think about when you were last angry, right? Like where in your body did you feel that? How did you know you were angry? Were you clenching your jaw, clenching your fist? Did you feel hot? If you were anxious, like did your tummy hurt, right? Like what are those feelings? So starting to recognize in your body where you're feeling that heaviness and weight, or whatever it is for you, that's really important. So that last section here talks about the corresponding areas of your body where you feel that emotion. It's also super important in processing trauma and stress. Thank you so much for listening. We have a series planned for various mental health topics over the next few months that we are very excited to share with you guys. As I mentioned, May is Mental Health Month, and so we are partnering with other community agencies, and we have lots of fun things planned this month just to get information out. We're having a booth at the end of the month, so keep an eye on our Facebook page for details about what we have going on. All right, you guys take care, and I will see you next time.